Hey there everyone, and welcome to D&D Doge's Emporium of Tabletop RPG Cringe. In today's episode of RPG Horror Stories, we have a tale about a party of murder hobos ruining a first-time Dungeon Master's game, with really strange things. Then, for the Friday Glory story, we have another tale about a player ruining a DM's plans, but in a good way. But first, I have to ask, if you enjoy what I do on the channel, consider rolling a crit on that like button, subscribing to the channel, and even sharing the video if you feel so inclined. And to help out with that, by request, here is a lucky super close-up. But with that done, let's get into these stories. The Brothel from Hell by Reddit user Big Boy Cry. Alright, starting from the start, I used to be relatively new to D&D. I played a one-shot with my old college mates at the time, and despite not being very active in the game, and being pretty cringy at times, I fell in love instantly. I ended up buying the core books, and learning more and more about how the game worked, in the hope of making my own D&D session and story. Now, the original group had pretty much disbanded because of college work being stressful. Deadlines, work, the normal stuff. However, the only friends I had left were 3 mates that I met in college, and one I met through one of them. Now, I feel I should give some context to these 3 before I continue. The first one we will call Dwarf, because he actually was one in the original one-shot. He seemed to roleplay a short angry man, resentful of goblins really well, and was the one dedicated to roleplay the most. Overall, he was pretty sound for the first session. The next one on the chopping block we'll call Jacket, because he would die so much that he basically would make a new character every session. He was a sound guy and wouldn't take anything too seriously. The next guy was basically the same as the last guy, but in short, he was obsessed with goblins. A goblin slayer goblin, so we'll just call him Goblin. And the final one was the I didn't understand guts, edgy racist of the group, and I didn't realize how bad it was until a few sessions in. We'll call him Rivers. Session 0. I didn't spend too much time with this session. It was basically where I introduced them to the game and taught them how to make characters through D&D Beyond and how easy it was to play. I explained the story, Lost Mines of Phandelver, and what kind of adventurers would be best suited. Now, here's something to remember. I know people say, alignments don't really matter, just let them play how they want, but I wish to God that they stuck with their alignments. For context, Dwarf was chaotic neutral, Goblin was chaotic good, Jacket was neutral good, and Rivers was chaotic good. Session 1. The Start. I think this session perfectly foreshadowed what I was going to see in the future. So, it started in the tavern, and Jacket and Goblin were playing Soggy Biscuit in the corner. Yes, before I even finished explaining why they were there, they described in graphic detail what they were doing. Don't search it up, it's not worth it. Just use your imagination. What the hell's a soggy biscuit? Oh god! Anyways, Dwarf was of course trying to keep the story moving along, talking to the barkeep and learning about the quest, and so on. And while doing this, the Goliath, aka Rivers, kept talking over Dwarf, demanding that he be allowed to smash Jacket's skull in. I told him PvP wasn't exactly allowed, but he ignored me and kept pushing until I eventually had to let him. This was my first mistake. I'ma be honest, I was a pushover then. I let them get away with so much that I'm surprised that they haven't demanded my wallet yet. Anyways, after Rivers had essentially beaten Jacket to a pulp, he grabbed the 2 and stuffed them into a bag and slung it over his shoulder, and then threw them into the river. Now, one made the dex save to escape the bag. However, the other one didn't, and eventually died way too early from drowning due to his low rolls. This was Jacket's first death. Anyways, after a few laughs over his death, Goblin asked, "Can I roll for dex size?" Now, I had explained that I wanted a serious campaign, and they were already off the deep end. But, just like Rivers, he kept talking over me, rolled, and started mentioning every time he could that he had a massive schlong. Now, I expected them to not take it serious from the start. This was their guys' humor, and they just wanted to do a small amount of tomfoolery before the next session. But I wish I didn't let this stuff slide. Trip to Phandalin. If you know Lost Mines of Phandelver, you know what happens now. The Goblin Ambush. And overall, it went totally to crap. It was basically an hour of Rivers tanking all the damage and killing all the goblins, while goblins still talked about and made jokes about his schlong, like, "I pee on their corpses," or, "I drag my schlong in a pee trail forms." I was getting sick of it at this point, but the session still wasn't over. We still had to get to Phandalin, and the party basically agreed to just walk the rest of the way. Upon reaching Phandalin, I introduced them all to the people inside the town upon entry, and instead of their usual, "Where's the bar?" or "Where's the mine?" they asked, "Do you guys have any property for sale?" I was kinda weirded out by this. I knew something was up, but I couldn't guess exactly what they were planning. Anyway, because the night was closing in, I decided to show the players to the local inn. Now, remember the soggy biscuit from before? Unfortunately. Well, they started doing it again, and this time, I had a whole thing where the barman caused the guards to get the goblin to stop. But, as they entered, the first thing Rivers did was describe him running up to the guard and piercing his chest with a greatsword. Now, I was kind of expecting this, but not this extreme. He describes killing the guard and then standing in front of the door so the other guard couldn't get out, and beating him with the other guard that was still on his sword until they were nothing but red paste. I really didn't know what to do besides sending more guards to hopefully overwhelm him, but not only the dwarf jumped in to defend him, but also killed them all in more violent and gruesome ways. And bear in mind, in every description, they were still alive and in agonizing pain. Sometimes I worry for my safety because of the way he plays. But wait, guards do have stats, and I think they have an armor class of 16. Those players should have had to roll to hit, and then they should have rolled for initiative. I mean, they aren't commoners. Anyway, let's continue. I had to give them a reason to leave that inn, so I made it so the barman had disappeared. I had made it so he fled through a cellar door. Luckily, they didn't do any perception checks. After going outside, they basically had to sleep outside because of the lack of places wanting to take in a psycho Goliath, a perverted goblin, and a short-tempered dwarf. And that's where I left it for that session. However, this was only session 1, and the other ones would quickly devolve too. Session 2. The Aftermath and Side Quests. The next day, the party wakes up in the middle of town. Basically a desert since no one wants to go outside and deal with the 3 psychopaths, and the 4th one about to rejoin. Now, personally, I'm a huge Witcher fan, so I incorporated the board system from the 3rd installment as a way to give the side quest to the players. After they discovered this, they took on the Orc Trouble side quest, which, if you're familiar, is just a simple kill or deal with all the orcs job. After going there, I expected more violence, the same as I did with the original Goblin Ambush. However, what happened at the end wasn't exactly what I was expecting. After the fighting, Goblin described himself cutting off the head of the ogre who was in the fight. Now, I expected him to take it as a trophy, just like in The Witcher. However, he then revealed his plans to me. He wanted to set up a brothel with Jacket and himself that used mind-controlled women, decapitated heads as fleshlights, and sheep as glory holes.
Jesus Christ!
Trust me, you couldn't pay me to come up with that crap. And why do all this?
Because it was funny, because Goblin is Welsh.
Yes, that was their reasoning for doing this crap. I had to take a step back to comprehend what I heard, and everyone else was just laughing along and calling me a dictator and other names. You could probably guess what Rivers said. All because I wouldn't let them do this. After returning back, they wanted to sell off all their loot that they obtained, besides all the weapons, for gold. Now, I decided that no one wanted to do business with these guys because of the inn incident, so they basically verbally abused the shopkeeper long enough until he let them in, and after doing that, they ran in and killed his wife, and mocked him relentlessly for it. After which, he ran out of the store and into the inn, where later his fate was uncovered. I think that this is, personally, what broke the camel's back, but because I'm just so damn stubborn to give them a D&D experience worth remembering, that hopefully wasn't a bestiality is funny, lol, was to show them, G-Man style, the consequences of their actions. So I did one more session after this. And yes, they did do the other 2 quests, and they went about exactly as you'd expect. Session 3, The Hideout. So, after taking over the shopkeeper's shop as their own, and using it as a base, I had an event happen where all the local villagers came to the house in an attempt to burn it down with them inside. Now, waking up in a burning building, smoke covering their vision, and the heat of the fires burning their skin, I was hoping that this would get them thinking about their previous actions and how it had consequences. And then Rivers said,
They're just mad at us because DM is a crybaby man-child and he wants us dead.
Yep, apparently it's not because the villagers quickly got fed up with their bullcrap and a witness saw the keeper run from the building after they left, so they gathered together to get rid of the problem. No, it's the DM being a crybaby over the fact that they just want to set up a Jeffrey Epstein brothel in the middle of Phandalin. They clearly saw D&D at this point as an outlet for being psychopaths, and I think that sealed the deal that this will be my last session ever with these people. So, Rivers goes out to the crowd and immediately goes full Homelander and tries to kill all the civilians using his greatsword. You know, if I had played Resident Evil 4 before this, instead of later, I probably could have had a gruesome idea planned out for this event. But nope, in the end, he just slaughtered a ton of civilians. At this point, I was done, so I just railroaded them through the hideout, ending with them slowly burning the boss at the end in agonizing pain, and it did involve more torture porn that I'm not going to describe. After all this, I called them out on their behavior, basically berating them on being murderous psychos, because this wasn't at all what I described in Session 0. I was okay with going a bit off the rails, maybe a less serious campaign with some funny moments that we could talk about. But no, they wanted to live out a psychopathic power fantasy and call it D&D. And after calling them out, they promptly berated me, not on my skills as a dungeon master, but rather on my appearance. At this point, I had lost it and left. No matter how many times I tried to explain the problems, they would act as if I was the problem. I started talking to them again on Discord recently, talking about giving this D&D another shot, but with a different DM. I was hoping things would be different. Maybe they wanted to try again. And yep, they just did it all again, just with a different dungeon master who was allowing this stuff to happen. So yeah, that was my first attempt at DMing my own campaign, and now I don't even want to play D&D anymore because of this. Now, you could say, hey, just find new friends to play with, which I find hard to do, because I myself am on the spectrum, so I find it hard to talk to new people, especially roleplay. But after this, I've concluded that anything is better than dealing with that nightmare party again. Thank you for reading, and I'm gonna go cry while drinking a bottle of Balmers, hoping that I kill the brain cells that remember this story. TLDR, I let a D&D group push me over until they wanted to start a Jeffrey Epstein brothel with corpse fleshlights and sheep. Well, that was definitely one of the most unique murder hobo stories I've read in a while. Now, OP says that these guys were his friends, but I don't think they are. I think they saw someone that really liked D&D and wanted to try ruining his first game, and they saw the opportunity to mess with a dude that was on the spectrum. That much is evident, as when OP tried to talk to them about how he didn't like the way the game was going, they just made fun of him for it. And when OP finally stood up for himself, they made fun of his appearance? Seriously, F those guys. I do hope that OP doesn't give up on D&D or tabletop RPGs completely because of these douchebags. It really is an amazing game that lets people's creativity come out, but I can understand finding it hard to talk to new people. Just don't give up, OP. I'm sure you will find a table of decent players to play with eventually. But after that story, I think it's time for a palate cleanser, and to close out the week with this Friday's Glory story. The Time I Ruined My DM's Carefully Planned Encounter, by Reddit user Fried Kilomari. For some context, we were a group of brand new D&D players, and because we wanted to play a bunch of weird races, we played 3.5e, with a lot of homebrew approved by our DM. We'd been playing a campaign that heavily revolved around dungeon crawling and searching for magical items, and around level 5 or 6, our DM decided that it was time for something a little different than our casual fare. We had our traveling party come across a village whose sheep were being stolen by kobolds and taken to the long-dormant volcano. Well, whatever they were doing with the sheep, it has to be better than what that last group was planning. Which may or may not have held some manner of ancient treasure, or a temple of Hades. The villagers weren't quite sure. We were more than happy to investigate, since treasure hunting was the entire reason for our quest, and we were all too curious for our own good. So, off to the dormant volcano we went. Inside, we found an overgrown forest that contained a rundown stone castle, complete with a pen full of all the sheep taken from the villagers, and we couldn't just leave the kobold alive because, well, they would just keep stealing the sheep from the villagers, and we'd be back to square one. Upon entering the main corridor of the castle, we had combat with about 5 or so kobolds, and we heard more within a room off to the side of the hallway. Rather than open the door and rush in, I got the brilliant idea to hypnotize the kobolds inside after cramming a wedge under the door to lock it. You see, I had decided to play a sphinx, my favorite mythological creature, and one of the racial abilities the species had was hypnosis. Basically charm person or creature, but a droning incantation that affected 2d4 hit dice of creatures that could see or hear me, based on a will save. Basically, this made whatever I successfully hypnotized see me as a neutral party, and neutral parties saw me as a friend. We went through room by room, as I hypnotized every kobold through the doors we wedged shut from the outside, and through this, we discovered that the kobolds were stealing sheep to offer up as a tribute to a young red dragon that had taken roost on the castle's roof, and they saw it as a god. Naturally, we had to fight the young dragon to keep the village safe, so up to the roof we went, just about entirely stocked up with ammo and spell slots, because I had talked us out of every combat encounter that the DM had planned, and I'm talking rooms full of kobolds, neutralized and trapped inside. There were at least 30 kobolds on one floor alone. Needless to say, we won the fight against the dragon, after I tried and failed to talk us out of combat. And it was then that the DM looked at me and said, "You know, I had planned this entire encounter to really make you guys keep track of your ammo and spell slots, so you would have to choose combat strategies wisely. I'm kind of impressed by how you managed to avoid just about everything." After the entire table burst out laughing, and me apologizing profusely between tears of laughter and guilt, we finished up the session by convincing the kobolds to work for us in our new keep. It was a well-rolled intimidation check on my part, something along the lines of, "We just killed your god, you can either serve us or die next." And wouldn't you know it, the kobolds thought that working for a wage sounded pretty swell. To this day, we still laugh about this session, and I still apologize to the DM for ruining his encounter. But he laughs it off like a good sport and says, "I love seeing the ways you guys mess up my plans." I am aware that the ability is super broken. This was a campaign based on fun shenanigans and hunting down magical items of the week with a close group of friends, so none of us were particularly concerned with well-balanced homebrew. However, this was the first and last time that I used this ability so extensively. Well, that is one way to handle a castle full of kobolds. At least the DM was a good sport about it, and just found the humor in it. And, like one commenter said on the post, a good DM will tell you that no plan ever survives contact with the party. But that will do it for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Until next time.